We're having problems streaming on Facebook, so we are going on YouTube. Check. All right. We are live on YouTube tonight. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Focus on Liberia. We are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. Tonight is our special Flag Day broadcast. We'll be discussing the history of the Liberian flag. With me tonight is Dr. Herbert Brewer. Dr. Brewer, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dennis.
All right. And happy August 24.
Same to you, likewise.
All right. Dr. Brewer is a professor of history of the Atlantic world, and in particular, the 18th and 19th century African-American life and culture. His research focuses on the African-American diaspora in the Atlantic world. He's currently writing a biography of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, that's Liberia's first president. Dr. Brewer has taught in the Washington, D.C. public school and served as administrator of the University of Maryland Miller Center for Historical Studies. He has taught history at the University of Maryland at College Park, the University of Maryland at Baltimore County, and at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where he currently serves as an assistant professor of history and coordinator of the African American and African Diaspora Studies program. Dr. Brewer was the recipient of the 2017-2018 Mellon Fellowship for the study of slavery at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. His work has appeared in a variety of publications. He is a co-author of the recently published Guide to the History of Slavery in Maryland. Professor Brewer lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, the economist Erica Rapier Brewer, and their son, Aiden. Dr. Brewer, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you.
All right. And before we jump into it, you are a recipient of the 2017-2018 Mellon Fellowship for the study of slavery at George Washington University. That caught my attention. What does that mean, if you can explain that to me?
Sure. And it was, of course, Georgetown. I know George Washington's there too. People mix the two up often, but it was Georgetown University, but no problem. So the Mellon Fellowship was a Mellon Fellowship for the study of slavery in particular. And the Mellon Foundation has, in recent times, spent some money trying to develop the scholarship in the United States and the world on the question of slavery. And so Georgetown University was fortunate, I guess, to win a substantial amount of funds to host the scholars. And of course, I applied for it and won this particular fellowship from them. Georgetown in particular has begun to engage or grapple with its own connections to slavery. Georgetown, which is the Georgetown University, that is, which is the oldest Catholic university in the United States, was a university founded by Jesuits. And the Jesuits were deeply implicated, part of the system of plantation slavery in Maryland and Virginia and the Chesapeake in the 17th and 18th centuries, which of course was not uncommon. All of the major institutions in that society were more or less based upon, connected to slavery in one way, shape, or form. So the Jesuits, being who they are, like many of the other religious orders, were in the business of education, and they had activities. They needed to finance their activities. And a major source of funding and financing for them was their ownership of plantations, which were based on slavery, because that was the dominant labor system in the Chesapeake, in that region, at that time. So Georgetown, more recently, was approached by some of the descendants of people who had been enslaved by that institution. And so as part of its, I guess, attempt, as I said, to engage with, to make amends for that past, they've been studying their past. And so I joined that particular team. I did several things, not specifically connected to Georgetown, but because my own work involves researching history, the history of slavery and the history of slavery where Georgetown is, I guess they figured that I would be a great compliment to them. And it was a very fruitful, it's been a very fruitful relationship with them.
All right, any money involved, you get paid?
Oh yes, the fellowships are well endowed.
All right.
Well endowed, yeah.
Okay, great. Now let's come to our topic for tonight, which is the flag of Liberia. We all learned about the flag, but tonight we want, this being Flag Day, we want to delve a little more on the flag of Liberia. So let me start by asking you the idea of having a flag. Where does that idea come from?
Okay, so to talk about flags in this political context, of course, is that flags today are associated with states, right? Flags are symbols of states.
Right.
And but the flags themselves predate our modern state. It is important for us to understand, that of course flags have histories, and flags as political symbols have histories. The modern state itself has a history. The modern state does not go all the way back into time. The modern state, as we know and understand it, has been around for about 500 or so years. Prior to that, there were a whole variety of state forms. Today, when we think of a state, we think of a specific geographical space that is under the control of a specific centralized power. And within that particular power, that centralized power, a monopoly of force, if you like, exists. And these states that exist in this global state system basically is a reciprocal relationship. They respect as they like to say, territorial integrity of each other. But that was not always the case. No. Oftentimes, people were subjects of dynasties, and subjects of particular dynastic rulers or families. And those dynasties could have had subjects in a whole variety of places, right? So what I'm saying is that, the state form itself is recent in terms of global history. The flag itself, as a representation of the state, is kind of recent. But prior to that, flags, all sorts of people use flags for all manner of things. Flags were used to convey power, to convey armed forces, those sorts of things. In fact, if you look into any nation, any state, whether we're talking about Liberia or whether we're talking about the United States or anybody else, various institutions within these states have their flags. Like there's a presidential flag, those sorts of things. There are regional flags, sub-national flags for counties or states or regions or territories within states. So lots of particular offices have flags. Indeed, the military has flags, and various branches of the military have their flags. So the flag is like an oval symbol of an institutional, kind of institutional symbol. And in the modern era, it has sort of carried over to go beyond just representing an army or a central power. It now became, again in the modern era, a representative of the people. And that aspect of it is also very new, a flag standing for people. It's new as well because the notion of sovereign or popular democracy, popular sovereignty actually, it's also kind of relatively 200 years plus a few. The United States and France and those sorts of places, the French Revolution, etc., being some of the pioneers in that notion of a popular sovereignty. And so that the flag now represented not a monarch, not a dynasty, not a particular ruler, but now the people who constituted this nation.
So do we know who first invented this, or which country first flew a flag, or which, do we know?
Sure. So again, in the modern, when I say modern sense, again, this modern nation state that we're talking about, take something like the British flag. The British flag went through variations, and actually as different parts of the British kingdom came together, they sort of added the flags of the other constituent elements. But those flags themselves, the constituent part flags themselves represented the powers of dynasties, etc. before that. So what I'm saying is that in some cases, in the case of, let's say, Britain, a place whose history is sort of well known, a flag might have been the symbol of a particular monarch or dynasty. And then subsequently, that particular flag with variation becomes the flag of the people. That's what I'm sort of saying there. Again, in the strict modern sense, I think the American and French flags would be amongst, and then of course Haiti, they're all within a decade of each other. The American, French, Haitian flags, those would be about the first flags really in the modern era that stood for, represented these people, the people of a place or this idea that they were all bound together and had these common ties together, these national bonds, national ties. I mean, it's really interesting the extent to which notions of nationhood as we understand it today is, again, a recent phenomenon. People identify themselves in terms of their locale, the local area they came from, right? Their region, their communities, their towns or villages. Again, region, not in terms of nation. And early on, most nations, I'm going into the 1700s, 1800s, are multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic. That was like a normal thing. Right. And so even the up until today, that still is the case. But the notion of the nation being singular and sharing a single culture and those sorts of things, that came later. That aspect of it came later. And the flag actually was one of the things that stood as an early representation of, okay, we're one. Right. Because in reality, they ate different foods, they spoke different languages, and this applies to all of these countries, regardless of which continent you're on. Right.
Is there any country you know of that does not have a flag, or why would a country really need a flag, and what happens if you don't have one?
So the flag, nothing would happen, but there's no law that you should, but it's a convention, and oftentimes human beings operate on the basis of convention, habits and customs. And these customs become agreed, accepted upon, and people, follow those customs. So the question immediately becomes, so where's your flag? Where's your national anthem? Those sorts of things. Let's go back. You asked the question. I want to combine the two together. So the French Revolution, in many ways, we're looking for a historical event that changes things. In many ways, brings to the fore many of the trappings of independence, nationhood, and those sorts of things, because they had a national anthem, the Marseillaise, which is very famous. It's really kind of like the first national anthem, that went with the flag and so many of the trappings. And others would then copy them. Francis Scott Key, because I know a lot of your audience is in the United States, are aware of these things, the American Star Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key song, that came way after the American, a few decades after the American Revolution and American independence. So in many ways, in creating a national anthem, the Americans are copying the French. And then the British had an old song about God Save the King or Queen, whichever is in office, and then they copy it. And people have many national, patriotic songs. Many nations in Liberia, there's both the national anthem, there's the Lone Star Forever, right? These patriotic songs. Many nations have that. And so the point, I guess the general point I want to make is that the nations, they copy each other, and this is how conventions get established. And so there's a kind of mutual understanding amongst these states and the people who control these states that these are going to be the symbols of our power that we have. I mean, the flag, in many ways, having a flag has some very practical, it serves some useful and practical purposes. Where are flags usually? They are stationed strategically at borders, right? And that border, because it's not a fence, so the border tells you, okay, this is where that man's sovereignty ends, is the limit of his authority. And this is where this other authority starts. So that's a kind of example of how flags are being practical. When people go into war, they fly their flag.
Right. So as I said, we don't know of any country that doesn't have a flag.
No. And no. And again, simple reason, if everybody else who claims to be a sovereign state has a flag, and you want to also be a sovereign state, well, you're going to raise a flag too.
I see.
And you're going to have a passport. You want to have immigration authorities. All of those different things are supposed to be symbols of independence.
Right. And the flag is actually a symbol.
That's exactly what it is. It's a symbol.
All right. Right. So let's come to the Liberian flag. And if we can start with a brief history of the Liberian flag, the Lone Star.
So there's a simple part of the story, as in like what year is it made, when did it fly, those sorts of things. You can get down to that. I don't think there's any dispute over that part. It's basically unproblematic. It has 11 stripes, 11 horizontal stripes, alternatively red and white, a blue rectangle in the left-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, and a white star. And if you look at, because for historians, we always want to look at the documentary evidence. There are several different individuals who are either eyewitnesses to the first time the flag was unfurled, and when it was put up, and all we know that it's in. I'm thinking August or something like that of 1847 actually, and which I think is why they use this August 24th date as this flag day. And it's a committee of women, etc. I don't know. So I don't really, never dealt in those details, how many they were and what their names were and that sort of thing. We imagine that they would, of course, have been individuals within that little community of Monrovia at that time. What is interesting, of course, because part of some of my interest is that there were the seamstresses, and that particular profession is a profession that was fairly well established, meaning that profession of tailoring, both male and female, and that those folks would have come to the fore at that moment. But those are like the basic. I don't think people dispute that part, meaning like what day it gets unfurled and who's making it and who that sort of thing. What is more fraught with lots of controversy and argument will have to do with why that particular design.
Okay.
That's the part that gets into you see people may have arguments about that.
Yeah.
The design. And for me as a historian, I look to the context. I look to the historical context, which I think helps us have a deeper, better meaning, and oftentimes a more nuanced understanding of how and why people do what they do. Now, I'm going to preface this part of my remarks by saying that I'm not here to take sides in terms of this historical argument as to what did these people think they were doing or what was the meaning of it all. I can explain, just fill in what's the context, what's going on at this moment that this is happening, and I do it conscious of the fact that we really, it's a warning. I think it's a reasonable warning that we try not to read history backwards. Right. We try to understand what's going on at that time, not imposing or assigning to the past, our experiences of today or things that happened later on.
Makes sense.
That's so I'll put that caveat there. One of the factors that led to the country's independence was the pressure on those individuals who led the country to independence, the pressure on them from slave traders, from European slave traders, right, along the coasts of West Africa. And European slave traders in the 1820s, 30s, 40s are still active, even though Britain and the United States have officially banned the transatlantic slave trade. These slave traders, nonetheless, were still active. The most notorious ones in the 1830s and 40s are Blanco and Cano. I don't know if they still teach them in Liberian schools. Theodore Blanco and Cano. Theodore Cano and Blanco. Spanish Italian traders. The colonies that had emerged between the Cape at Cape Mesurado, because basically essentially that's what Liberia was Cape Girardeau for the most part, and a few other little, colonies along the coast there. Those that had emerged were quite vulnerable to attack and to the kinds of pressures from the European slave traders. So again, what I'm trying to, again, this context I'm building here, this little emerging, this embryonic state that they have, this colony, this colonial thing they're trying to build, is vulnerable, and so they spend an enormous amount of their time preoccupied by their safety, preoccupied by how they would defend themselves, etc. So they're using a variety of means. One of their major benefactors, of course, one of the major sources of protection for them was actually the United States Navy. It was an important part of that protection. Without the United States Navy, the intervention judiciously every now and then, that those colonies would not have, I would argue, would not have survived. The United States Navy provided them with material, with military material as well. And those are crucial things to understand. So and people don't think about this often, but even before Liberia is independent, a flag is flying, where these Liberians are claiming authority. A flag is flying, because if a slave trader is coming to land, right, or is in the waters, the slave trader did it all the time. Say, who are you? Meaning to the Liberians, the slave trader, the European slave traders are saying to the Liberians, who are you? Who are you to stop me from doing what I want to do? And that's a source of dispute and argument right there. Why should I pay you anything? Why should I listen to what you have to say, etc.? You don't have any authority. What do you have a state? So of course, for the Liberians, those colonists I'm speaking of here, they then have to sort of show somehow or the other that they have strength, that they have the means, right, the capacity
and sovereignty.
Yeah, that sovereignty. But so you see the pressure for them to claim independence here. But in the meantime, they have to sort of make the claim that no, we have some sort of protection. We have some, in these days, in our era that we live in today, there's a comment, there's a phrase, because I want your audience to get a sense. This is not so strange. What's going on here? There's a comment. There's a phrase called the nuclear umbrella. Japan, for example, operates under the nuclear umbrella of the United States. The Japanese have it into their constitution that they don't create nuclear weapons. That came out of World War II. The point I'm making here is that the nuclear power of the United States serves as a guarantee of Japan's security. Okay, it's fundamental. And so let's go back to Cape Girardeau in the 1830s and 40s. In effect, the United States Navy becomes that nuclear umbrella of that era. Right. And so what would be what is the easiest symbol of that nuclear umbrella? It would be the flag of the United States. Correct. You see? So the flag of the United States was flying there. It was flying at Girardeau before independence. But at independence, at the point where now they come to their, to their arrangements, etc., and they're now declaring this independence, they are not going to stray very far from what is in effect a kind of protective place. Right. So in the context of that time, it is reasonable for them, considering all of the things that are going on, considering their vulnerability from the sea, that having that flag as close as possible is a very kind of practical thing to do. It's for them, it makes a lot of sense to do. You mean having it resemble the flag of the United States? Yes. That's practical. Yes, it's a very, very practical matter. If they were living in an environment where they had total control over their coasts, the coastlines where they were, they could have been more adventurous, let's put it that way. Right. But these are people who were dealing in the moment. And that kind of preempted my next question, which was, why is this so similar to the United States that sometimes
people get it so confused that it's the United States flag. In fact, Mr. Sai Nyokron Yansio, who's another historian, wrote that the Liberian flag, was it actually designed or copied? So that was my next question as to why does it look so much similar to that of the United States?
Yeah. And as my answer, like in my answer, I think if you look at that context, the question, that question is like another sort of question needs to be asked, because, copied or not copied, for them, that was one of the little tools they had, and they took advantage of that scenario. Yeah, for many years, folks have made that argument, the business about copying, of the US flag. I mean, on the one hand, again, flags resemble each other. Yeah, that's just, you asked at the very start, about the history of flags. I could, the list is long. You look at the French flag and the flag of Luxembourg, and the flag of Holland, they all look the same. It's red, white, and blue, 3 stripes. And then sometimes they change the direction. It's red, white, and blue, or blue, white, and red. You look at the German and Austrian flags, they almost look the same. When we go on and on, lots of different countries have that. Even this very same red, white, and blue, red stripes. Malaysia, of all places, way out there in Asia, it's a red, white, and blue flag with red and white stripes. I've seen a Malaysian flag before, but it doesn't have the white star. I've seen a Malaysian flag before, and my immediate thing was, is that a Liberian flag? Oh, actually, it's not. The Cuban flag also a kind of red stripes and blue. So so that happens. The business, so is it a copy? But I think behind the question of copy, because that's more important there. Behind the question of copy is a critique of the founders of the state, and I think the critique is basically that they were not men enough, the man enough. They were not. They were not authentic. They were mere puppets, under the control of somebody else. Did not have identities of their own, more or less. And the phrase some people would use, I wouldn't use it, but slavish in their mentality, kind of an indicator of that, that sort of thing. But again, I'm saying that if you look, just looking at the historical context in which they're existing, it'd be difficult to sort of say, these are just people who were saying yasa masa, whatever you say masa, I'm going to do what you say, and I'm doing everything possible, to remain loyal and that sort of thing to the US. I mean, again, I think Liberians would be shocked. They really would be, if they went and they read the letters, actually read the letters, the newspaper editorials, and of those people in the 1840s and things who established the state. They clearly they were like many politicians. They created alliances, a marriage of convenience, I would argue, with powerful interests in the United States. But many Liberians look at their founding through the lens of the 20th century, in the late 20th century. And so if the leaders of Liberia after the Second World War kind of had a, slavish, perhaps we might say, attitude toward the United States, and maybe it's like, oh, well, that must have always been the case. Not necessarily. But, if you look at Liberian leaders over the last 50, 60 years, let's just, 60, 70 years, all of them, they kind of wag their tail when the US comes. And so people probably just say, that obviously must have been the way it always was, but that's not necessarily so.
So besides that, the obvious resemblance to the United States flag, there are some Liberians that also argue that the flag does not represent all of Liberia. It simply represent the settlers.
Yeah.
What's your answer to that argument?
Yes. No, so who created Liberia? Meaning who formed the Liberian state, right? As opposed to the Liberian people. The Liberian state was founded by a particular group of individuals from the United States of America.
Yeah.
And there, in the 19th century, which is also an important part, a thing to understand, in the 1840s, and their interest, their experience, their outlook reflected that. That's who they were. Although they had these grand ambitions in terms of, again, their practical, like what was actually happening and where were they actually? What we know as Liberia today did not exist even in 1847. And I think that's an important thing to consider. Yeah. Liberia did not, no part of what today is Nimba County, no part of what today is Bong County, no part of what today is Lofa, no part of what today is Grand Jita County was in that original Liberia.
Right.
Liberia emerged and it grew, expanded over time, and we can talk about that history too. Mm-hmm. But that was not Liberia, And again, for the audience, it's important for them to think about this. In the United States, when the United States was founded in 1776, it was 13 colonies. Right. California was not part of the United States. Texas was part of Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. Everything west of the Appalachians was different places. Native Americans are there. Many different people are there. And I'm using the United States, of course, because again, many folks are here and they know some of that history. Okay. But this same story applies to so many other nations. Now, this is not to let off the founders, or I should even say, more importantly, their successors in office, who people, when Liberian history is discussed, there's a tendency to take the founding of the nation and then collapse everything in the middle and jump to the present or the current period, But there's a lot that transpired between the 1840s and 50s, and the rest of the century and into the 20th century. Lots that basically transformed Liberia. In fact, I would argue even that what Liberia became is not even what many of the founders thought it would have become.
So in essence, you say it makes sense since the settlers found Liberia for the flag to reflect that.
Exactly, and you see, that is part of the history of Liberia. Now, I think that many Liberians would like for a flag, as they would say, to reflect. Oh well, we are a multi-ethnic society. There were people there before these people came from America, and the flag should somehow reflect that. Right. An argument actually that someone like myself actually used to make. In another context, in a political context. However, the people of Liberia, for whatever reason, when opportunities presented themselves, right. So then change that symbol, into something that you would reflect that history of those who were there before, larger, etc., in very specific sorts of ways. Did not take that opportunity. And when I say that, I'm speaking specifically of post 1980. Right. There were many opportunities and occasions for that to happen. It happened, and I don't see it on anybody's serious agenda even now. So I think that for many folks, it's like, look, this is the history. That's kind of how it. That's it. It was there, and something else I should add. So people argue about their symbols. People argue about their past, and that's those things are normal. But the flag and so they're different. In fact, I want to say that there are even different ways of interpreting and understanding what it means to be Liberian.
Okay. Yeah.
Serious, huh? Beyond just okay, we live together, and you make history together. Therefore, you have a past. That means you have a future. You're there, and so these are all the different parts of that identity. And then you say, well, but if the flag, how can the flag be a unifier if there are people who are opposed to it? That could be
right.
That would be the comeback. Why should I be loyal to something or think something represents me and I don't think I'm reflected or represented in it?
Right.
Well, I mean, people can think about that. If somebody if the system has changed, and the system has changed, if the system has changed, the flag is there, but the flag no longer represents the people who founded the country. The flag represents what the country is today. So that the meaning of the flag has changed. That's what I'm trying to get to.
And that's what leads us to maybe changing it or that, because it's history, but people have moved through certain stages. Like the United States, you gave example of when they were 13 colonies, so we had 13 stars. Now when it went to 50, the stars increased.
Right.
Can we also look at that and say what modification can be made to the Liberian flag?
Yeah, I'm sure. In fact, there are people who've made arguments toward that regard. Look, again, some countries change their flags completely, and some people's flags come in and out. The Haitian flag, again, one of the oldest national flags. It was red and blue. Actually, red, white, and blue flag too. Red and blue, it's like the French flag, even though they were, a slave rebellion fighting against the French and killing off the French, but the flag resembled that French flag too. And then when the Duvalier dictatorship came up, Duvalier changed the flag. And then when Duvalier was overthrown, his son was overthrown, the people changed the flag back to how it was before. In Congo, DRC, with Mobutu, same thing happened. The Congolese have one flag with Lumumba and them. Mobutu changed the flag. When Mobutu left, they brought back their old flag. And then we can go on and on and on and on. There are lots of, those things happen. So you cannot foreclose that notion that Liberians would say, no, maybe we want a triangle in our flag, not a square, a rectangle, or we want to change the colors, or we want to add something else. I can see people doing that, but then on the other hand, so those views are there. You will see people, and not for the first time too, I should say, and then you'll see people also saying, no, leave it alone. That's just the history. That's it.
So let me ask you,
because it's more. So Liberia is an old country. This is kind of I think Liberia is an old country. It is an old nation. In terms of the world, it's a very old nation, which means that it has a very long history.
Yeah.
And Liberia is older than most of the states in Europe. People don't even realize that. Germany became a nation called Germany. After Liberia was an independent country called Liberia. And because Liberia is an old nation and has lots of history, the flag over time has come to represent all of those different parts of the history of Liberia. You see, so it's the same flag that in the Civil War. That's part of Liberia's history as well.
So let me ask you a direct question: should the Liberian flag be changed to represent today's or realities, or you think it's fine as it is?
No, again, I said it before. For me, I'll just stick with my own giving historical context, of what has happened, how things have changed over time. Whether I want to change the flag or not, I got no power to do it, and no control over that. And as I said, as in the past, as a political partisan, I was one of the people who wanted to change the flag. But I've sort of come to, okay, let me just understand what it is. And to me, that's also very interesting. What is it that when the time came again, especially in the 80s, 90s, and that sort of thing, to change the flag, what held back? What kept people back? And because I suspect that if you held a referendum today, besides the fact that people would say don't waste money with referendum, I think that vast majority of Liberians would keep their flag. And that's my sense. That's my sense of it.
Because there have been attempts to change it. Starting with President Toba when he set up that committee.
Right. Yeah.
Quite recently, there was another committee on the national symbol. So why is it that with all those efforts, the flag or any of those national symbols has not been changed?
And what I'm saying is that Liberians have come to invest their own meaning in the flag. So the Liberian flag is the Lone Star playing a football game. And the Lone Star itself is actually a national symbol, the team, it represents the whole country. Right. The Liberian flag also represents Pambada. The Liberian flag represents Tobogi. I mean, I'm a serious business here, it's not just the Liberian flag represents, just a whole, the foods, the sounds of the nation. It represents a whole experiences people have, people who became refugees. The flag represents that experience as a Liberian refugee, in a Ghana, in a Guinea, in those places, the Liberian flag for them represents those things. And you can go further and further back. It represents for many people experiences that they've had that heightened their own national consciousness, made them feel special, different, etc., as Liberians. So for them, it's not, they don't, the first thing they think about is not, oh, J.J. Roberts. That's not what comes to their mind immediately. The first thing they think about is that, their world, their experience as Liberians.
The flag represent palm butter and toboggi. How is that? Or are you just joking?
No, I'm serious. I'm serious. How is that? Because those are Liberian things. Toboggi is a Liberian food.
Okay.
And palm butter is a Liberian food. And because those things are Liberian foods, that's a symbol of Liberia. And I mean, I can talk about the musicians too. Liberian flag is hip go. Liberian flag is all the other musicians and our cultural dances. Those are Liberian flags. When those people go abroad, that's what this is us. This is Liberia. And that's the flag they're waving. You want a quick shorthand to who we are. Boom, I show you the flag. That's, you see this flag. This is what it means. This thing that I'm doing. That's that flag. They associate their culture with that flag, and it's the people who are doing it. It's not the big politicians and all of those sorts of folks from up on high, the intellectuals and scholars and all of that. Is the everyday ordinary people who are doing that, who make that decision.
I mean, if they had, in my mind, if they had any other flag, they would have done the same.
That's true. That's true. But this is the one they have,
and that's why they are showcasing.
Yeah.
So to what extent can the flag, and I think you alluded to that already, serve as that symbol to unite the people? And what role can the flag play?
I mean, it does. I think the flag is almost so it's subliminal after a while. I would be shocked. I don't think any Liberian would, if Liberia made the World Cup, say, oh, the flag, they have to change the flag, so therefore I'm not supporting the team. No, they would immediately rally around. It's like, Pavlov's whatever theory, they see it and it generates a certain kind of reaction or response to them, in them, of this is us, this community, this national community that we've had. Even the fact that Liberians fight war against each other is a source of, I know it sounds strange, kind of counterintuitive, but is a basis of their national unity. It's like, you're fighting each other in a house to kind of, for that equality, and you're making claims and you're kind of saying, hey, this is for me too, and so basically what's happening, this argument is going on, but it's because all of y'all love the house and all of y'all want to be there.
Right.
That's what's happening. I mean, so I'm saying that everybody's claiming the flag in a way. So yeah, so any other flag that might have happened too, but that's what's there, people are claiming that, the people are claiming the flag. They're transforming the meaning of the flag. And in fact, it has been transformed actually. Because I think that the example I would like to give is the Civil War, is the Liberian Civil War. One of the things that within that whole experience, amongst all the other things that are happening in that experience, there's only one Liberian flag. At no point in that Civil War is there an attempt to change it, meaning the flag. There's nobody, all of the different groups, political groups and military groups and militias and all of those things, none of them, every one of them, you went to their headquarters, they had a Liberian flag behind them. Right. And they're claiming it, meaning they're claiming the nation, they're claiming their right, they're claiming the right to sit at the table, to be included, right? And they're saying, this flag represents me. I'm making that flag mine. That's basically what has happened.
And you can make that same argument to extend to other national symbols. I think you're going to say the same thing.
Yes.
Which some Liberians, say that don't represent them.
I mean, the most obvious one, of course. I think nobody got trouble with the national anthem, though. I haven't heard anybody say they don't like the national anthem.
What I heard was certain words in the national anthem that they don't like the race benighted and those kind of things.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah. Anyways, but you hardly hear. I mean, well, especially in comparison to the flag and the seal. The seal is the one that causes, I think, the biggest, conflict.
Especially that motto, the love of liberty.
Motto, it's the motto. It's the motto that gets on the people's nerves. Gets on people's nerves. And again, they may change it. I mean, I maybe they should change it. But again, and I think the same, as I say, as you said, the same context of the motto, the issue of the motto, the flag, they all kind of fit under there. Even though, again, I shouldn't be so flip. That the flag and motto are kind of different too, though, because as I'm giving a kind of context for the flag and the practical, I would argue, practical politics of the flag itself. The motto, they didn't have to say what they said. And that motto really reflects the fact that these are African diaspora, right, who are returning to Africa. That motto reflects that fact. Even though, again, you can deepen the interpretation of it, and in many ways, because
that would just be putting a spin on it.
Well, that's what but that's what symbols do.
Okay.
No, there's absolutely no symbol that has one meaning. Absolutely not. Look at the colors of the Liberian flag. I mean, we could sit down here and start thinking about ways to reconfigure and rethink our national flag. Blue, what the blue stands for, what the white stands for, what the red stands for. In our own societies, and I'm not talking about even the repatriates, I'm talking about the old original indigenous societies of Liberia. The blue, white, and red are very important colors, very sacred colors. White kola nut, white chicken, right? Those very important. Red, blood, fire, life itself.
Right.
Those are powerful colors that are there. That predate the flag.
Right.
And so what stops, so as Liberians are reclaiming this flag, we are also reinterpreting it and saying, no, this is what these things stand for. So it's that sort of thing. Same thing with the seal. In fact, we can even go so far as to say that even that clause in our constitution that says people of African descent, humankind emerged from Africa,
Yeah.
Everybody's of African descent. I mean, I always say somebody should go sue the Supreme Court and say to the Supreme Court, actually, I'm bringing you the scientific evidence and all of the weight of literature, which shows that all of us have come from Africa, so I'm of African descent, and therefore I'm eligible to be a citizen of the country, and that would finish the argument.
You got my head spinning on that one.
And I mean, the thing about it, you see, is that history is something that moves. History does that, and people. I keep using the United States because all Liberian people love to America. In this country, if you look at the American Constitution, it's been reinterpreted so a lot of times. It's changed drastically, and it's used the same words. When Thomas Jefferson said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," Thomas Jefferson, in his context, was thinking about something else. But Martin Luther King takes that same word and he changed it around. Stretch the meaning, and you put another spin on it.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln, before 100 years before that, he put another kind of stretch on. So that's how history changes. And I'm thinking that in the context of Liberia too, Liberians have changed the meaning of things over time, and that with their flag and with their own constitution and these things, even those settlers, those who came. They might have had, one idea in their head, but by the time of the early 20th century, their children and grandchildren now, who they've now handed power over to and that sort of thing, they have another kind of idea in their head, and they're doing different sorts of things in the country and changing the direction of the country. And then coming into the Tubman era, which is an important era that Liberians, I think, haven't sort of fully yet come to terms with, really. Have to change things. Again, I'm giving you a historical perspective,
right?
And I'm saying to people, you need to, when you think about your history and your past, you need to break it down into periods. These periods are actually very important. These understanding these sort of like periods of your past, because it sort of alerts you to the changes, to the continuities and the changes that take place. And I think that in a lot of the discussion that goes on about the Liberian past and present is that people hold history to be flat. You see trouble today and they say, well, that must have always been for 100 and 200 years now. This is all we have. You know, the phrase Liberians always use is from J.J. Robert time.
Mm.
You know? And actually, that's not true. That is not true. When J.J. Robert was president of Liberia, again, let me say that because J.J. Robert had no control over the vast majority of what today is Liberia. He had zero control, none.
Mm.
I mean,
All right.
that authority, no authority, that came much later. It had nothing to do with J.J. Roberts.
So we all the way from the from beyond Gulf back, J.J. Robert had no claim on us.
No, J.J. Robert could do anything to Swedru? Could he? Of course not. Tapeta, what J.J. Roberts could, what J.J. Roberts' influence could not reach Tapeta. You know, J.J. Roberts' influence couldn't reach Vonjima. No way.
So within the context of the period you talk about, we can make that claim that since J.J. Robert time, because things have been changing. In fact, the time you are referring to, you were not even part of Liberia. So what are you talking about?
Yes, and that's true. Right? And if you look at the oral histories of the people, the Liberian people who lived in those places, and they'll let you know that too. You know, they have that history. And
let's go back to the history of Susanna Lewis.
Yeah, but hold on for a second. Hold on, and the reason why we have wars, the reason people resisted the encroachment and the expansion of the Liberian state subsequent to Roberts, you know, you know, there are lots of battles that the Liberian state is fighting. The Gribble, fighting the crew, fight different people over time.
If we have time left, we'll go into a small history outside of the flag. But I was asking on because somewhere I read was people made the story of Susanna Lewis and others ladies to fit Bessie Ross and all that, but that truly it did not happen. In fact, one historian told me that Susanna Lewis died before August 24, 1847. So how can she make the flag? What do you know about that historical context of the seven ladies?
Yeah. So again, that's why I sort of said earlier on, I think that's like a minor issue, you know. Let's assume that she didn't exist. What does it tell us? That the myth-making machine of the Truic Party was up and running. That's what it tells us, you know. And again, I'm throwing that down there as a way, but you know, just talking about Liberians not understanding that history and why periodization is such an important thing. There is a certain Whig Party interpretation or Whig interpretation of Liberian history, right? And Whig, as I say, you know, the British have their Whig too, and we had our Whig. And by the way, they were not copying the British. The Truic Party is a party that emerges in the later period of Liberian independence, and it becomes the dominant political force in the country. And one of the things that helped it in that dominance, or made it consolidate that dominance, and actually it dominated most of Liberia's history. If you take that 200-year period of Liberia's history, you know, the Truic Party is the dominant political force, but it's not the dominant force at the beginning of the Liberian state. You know, it comes in later on, and it comes in as a result of a crisis. And one of the things the Truickers do, one of the legacies of the Truick, is this particular type of historical interpretation that is out there today. So I mean, that A. Doris Banks Henry's history that so many of us were fed and grew up on, you know, that was the Truic Party history. And so that you know, all of this mythology, and Matilda Newport and Susanna Lewis and so many others, you know, that was the Truic Party history, and a mythology really. And we have not really freed ourselves from that history yet. And that Truic Party, that Whig history of Liberia, has impacted the people who like to think that they're on opposite sides, but actually all of them are in the same kind of framework or paradigm when they look at Liberia's history. This sort of duality and dualism and that sort of thing that typically tends to exist. You know, the dark skin, light skin, and the indigenous and the Congo, that is very much part of that Truic Party, that Whig Party history of Liberia.
Okay, now let's come to the 11 signers again. If you do the history, if you list the names, there are 12 signers instead of 11, but our history says 11 signers of the Declaration.
Yeah, because Jacob Prout of Sino was the secretary of the convention. Jacob Prout, the 12th name, was the secretary of the convention, and many others, and several other documents, you know, point to that.
What does that mean? So he didn't sign it?
No, I mean, well, he signed it, but he was not a delegate. That's what it means.
Oh, okay.
There were 11 delegates. But even if Jacob Pratt, even all of those things that, to me, is part of that mythology. I have seen, I mean, and it's open to other kinds of interpretations.
Okay.
Which and I think people are right to be skeptical. Every generation comes in, it's got its own questions, and they revise and overthrow what the last generation had, And then sometimes after 2 or 3 generations, somebody might come back and go back to what the other people had, something a little different. Or we didn't really mean that, those sorts of things. It's possible that it was because of the signers. And if for historians is like you're doing detective work. So we go and we look carefully at the sources and see like, where did that piece of information actually come from? Now, who was the first person to say and write down that it was because of the 11, right?
Right.
Most of the people who quote that, for example, all they're doing is quoting somebody else. He said that he said that he said. That's how they talk, And when you start checking out, so let me see who you said. You're telling me that A. Doris Bank Henry said, well, I'm looking for A. Doris Bank Henry's, and A. Doris Bank Henry's, who is the source of life? Okay, well, she said Cassell. So I look at Cassell, and then Cassell said, well, it's Conga. So I look at Conga. Conga says Johnson. Henry. I look at Johnson, and Johnson say, well, it was Reverend Gurley. I look at Reverend Gurley, and, it's like at some point somebody added some story. I've never been able to trace the actual document itself. And let me tell you, no historian of Liberia has ever given us the original source of that bit of information. I'm saying that like that. There's quite a bit of Liberian history that is just completely, I'm saying, made up. It's gossip. It's somebody say. And because it was a long time ago, people have continued it. But to me, I see as well a kind of there's a trend, there's a kind of way where, and I'm using the framework of the Whig Party, where I think that the Whig Party was almost like this monolith in many ways. I mean, it was a one party. I mean, they tried to make it a one party state as much as they could, and dominated interpretations of the history of Liberia. I think that what Liberian history needs to do is to free itself from Whig Party hegemony, from the Whig Party ideology.
What are some of those things that you remember in the Liberian history that are made up? Because you made that reference. So
I'm saying that this story about the whole mythology about the flag and who made it, and what the stripes stood for, and all of those sorts of statements like that. There are 1 or 2 books written not by people who are there. This is like 30 years later, 40 years later. There's a book by this man called Harry Johnston. It's a very influential book, extremely influential book. Harry Johnston wasn't there. Harry Johnston wrote his book in 1900. And there's a lot of that stuff in there, and a lot of people quote him, as some sort of eyewitness and as some sort of reputable, source. Not a reputable source at all. He told a lot of lies, tall, small ones, all kinds of lies. And if you went back even further to the founding, another big culprit, as far as I'm concerned, he might have done some good things, but he was a big culprit in terms of how the interpretation is. The archives, if you like, the archives themselves need to be decolonized. Reverend Gurley, Reverend McLean, these are ACS people. I mean, if you read Liberian historians of Liberia, they are almost completely in debt to the ACS archives. And so the ACS comes out looking like roses, smelling like roses all the time. There's the old saying that when the lion begins to tell his own, until the lion tells his own story, the hunter will always be the hero. Right. And in the case of Liberia, the lion never has, the story of the lion is not really told. It's always the story of the hunter.
All right. Besides the national flag, we have counter flags, which many people don't know about. I want to play for my audience some of those flags so they can see other counter flags. Let's do that. We start with the national flag. You see the counters being represented by their flag and some national symbols. While we look at that, this is a happy birthday song for Liberia. While you look at this.
Liberia! It's your day! It's time to party! This is real fight! Do it for you! I am proud to be a Liberian, and I don't care what anybody will say. I will jump and sing and shout hooray, 'cause today is our Independence Day. Liberia, Liberia, we are free. Liberia, 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 our day. Liberia, we are free. Today is our day. Liberia, now my country, now my motherland, and I'll be where them bring me. That's why I started the hustling. So if you don't know, don't judge me. We don't want gunshots, we don't want go. All we want is equal rights, is to make our go. Liberians you and Liberians me and you. Let's live in harmony and peace. Who be there? So hard is right and good, and send your children back to school. And when and determination and remove time. Economically, strategically, physically, we can make a difference automatically. Let's live in unity of one and one for all. I am proud to be a Liberian, and I don't care what anybody will say. I will jump and sing and shout hooray, 'cause today is our Independence Day. Liberia, Liberia, we are free. Liberia, 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 our day. We are free. Today is our day. How long will you cry? Tell me how long? Rise up, forget about the past. Is dead and gone. Hate your brother, don't look at our bullet, do we wrong? All we have to do is join hands and sing this song. We are free, we are free.
All right, so we see the counter flags.
Yes.
And someone on YouTube described and said, are they joking? This is like somebody playing with a child playing with Microsoft Paint.
Mhm.
Have you saw those flags?
Yes, I saw the flags. I mean,
pull it down. Why is that?
You know, so when I was growing up, when you're playing football and the people say, give me 6 feet, 6 feet. Cut the people some slack, as they say, you know, and come to appreciate some of what they're doing. Some of them are creative. I think some of them are like straightforward and clear, you know, in terms of the natural resource that's in that county. Some of them is obvious, you know, or Wologizi or Putu. I mean, like, you know, particular important national treasures, and they're reflected. Or the people who are, you know, like the lighthouse, you know, it's all these, again, symbols, these variety of things. So if you are au courant with the history and the culture of the county, you would understand what it is that they're doing and saying, you know. I think that some of the folks who might criticize it too, or criticize the particular flags and all that, and they're doing it from an aesthetic point of view, actually, you know, that, oh, look at the way it's being drawn and all of that. That's just an aesthetic choice. You know, some people, you know, some people like formalism, I guess, you know, some people like straight lines and all of those things like that, you know, some people don't. And if you look at the aesthetics of you know, African art, one of the strengths of it, part of the uniqueness and part of the way it revolutionized art around the world, especially Western art, was actually to go away from straight lines. I mean, this is like a serious critique or counter critique I'm launching here. You know, Pablo Picasso gained a heck of a lot of influence and thought and idea, inspiration from our artists. And when I say our artists, I mean from Liberian artists, right? Our sculptures and those sorts of things like that are sat in museums and other stores and art galleries in Paris, right? Those things came from Nimba. Those things came from Lofran. Those places, bum. And Picasso is, I mean, the makers, the master makers, the Dan master makers of Liberia are among the greatest in the world.
Yeah, I like this one, but these flags, oh.
No, so I'm just saying that. So it's not surprising. I'm sure I see actually a correlation between those art forms and what's reflected on those county flags. And then again, that's my bias, So,
Right.
Yeah.
The proverbial, Fantine Merkin say boning rotten.
Yeah. It is true. It is true. But at the same time, hey, if you don't say, we are, who will say thou art? Right?
I know. I know.
Mhm.
All right, but I don't know if those flags, those county flags are used anywhere, or are they really, spoken about in the counties?
So, brother, let me ask you a question.
Hmm.
When every county in the United States, every state in the United States has a flag. When do you see the flag? I don't know whether do you live in the Cal County or Gwinnett? When do you see those county flags?
Yeah, I think you have a point right there. So county flags are kind of little, even the state flag, you don't see it that much, huh?
Exactly. Those things are for administrative purposes, and that sort of thing. The insignia, the stamp, that sort of thing. So they have their place.
Okay.
Which is quite different actually than the national flag. It's a different kind of thing.
All right, I think that's fair.
Mhm.
So before I think we talk about the flag extensively,
Mm-hmm.
and just before we close, I want to go just slightly towards Liberian history. Your expertise, what you studied mainly about slavery in the Virginia, Maryland area.
Slavery in the Atlantic world.
Right, in the Atlantic world.
Yes,
So,
I mean right now I'm focusing on Virginia, Maryland, but it's a whole.
Okay, but it's slavery in the Atlantic world,
Yeah.
and Liberia being a place where slaves are being resettled, or free slaves are being resettled.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted you to talk to me a little bit about that experience studying slavery.
Yeah.
How is it like? And I think before the show started, I asked you, so much we know about slavery. I mean, what there again to study about slavery?
Mm-hmm.
And you laughed.
Yeah. We only know 10% of the story. There's way much more to uncover. The most important point I should make is that slavery is a global system. The second point I want to make is that slavery and the slave trade is alive and well in West Africa, including the areas between Cape Mount and Cape Palmas in the 1820s and 30s when Liberians are landing there. So not only, so in a way, it's kind of ironic that you have on the one hand, Africans in the diaspora who are returning home in freedom. And then you still have, even while that is taking place, the European slave system is still capturing and removing Africans, involuntarily from their homelands and taking them into the New World. So these things are happening side by side. I think again, I would just want us to rest right there and think about it for a while, because again, when we think about Liberia and Liberia's creation, we don't really recall and bring those two things together. The fact that the Europeans are most definitely still engaged in slavery and slave trade while Liberia is being formed. Those two things. And so again, context is everything.
Yeah.
The mere fact that is taking place, what that says about that system of slavery that was very powerful, very strong and going on. Liberia, that area that the Portuguese merchant sailors, mariners called the Gold Coast, specifically between Cape Mount and Cape Palmas.
The Green Coast.
The Green Coast, sorry. I misspoke. The Gold Coast further down. The Green Coast, that area of the Green Coast is a unique area, very unique area. One of the things that stood out about the Green Coast is that the Green Coast was the home of people who had a different type of political system, and the Green Coast, and that actually, the type of political system that existed there was unlike the political systems further inland, unlike the political systems up and down the coast. Green Coast stood out. There were lots of systems of self-government that were there, and that the people who lived there, who had come to inhabit those areas, had removed themselves from areas where you had more authoritarian structures, you know, centralized hierarchies, and they had removed themselves to get some freedom for themselves, again, self-government. So that's the kind of place it was. So that's a culture that already, you know, that was already settled and existed in that spot. So
that's similar to the people coming from Great Britain coming here for freedom.
Yes. And so in a way, you can see Liberia as a refuge, and as a refuge even before the people come from America, you know. Wow. So that's a place of refuge. And then so the people who come from America come and they find their refuge there too, you know, amidst, so like they're an island really in many ways amidst that sea of slavery that the Europeans are managing and controlling, you know, at that moment in time. So it's bold. I mean, it shakes up, you know, the balance of power in so many different ways when they arrive. Because the people who are there, then, you know, of course, people take different sides in all change and all conflicts. There's some who like, this is kind of one way to reinforce our freedom. I'm seeing the Liberians who are already, you know, in Liberia, the Liberians who are home, and so seeing these people come, there's a way to consolidate some of our freedom, or see them as no, maybe these people here might come and they're coming here, right? Might not be the best thing for us. So I mean, but the point is that that's the kind of context in which, right, you know, this historical process is going to unfold.
And that should explain even why that place was chosen as a refuge for the free slaves.
It is very unlikely that those folks coming from America would have found refuge in, you know, and not just found refuge, but being able to establish what they established in other parts. Now, let me widen the lens a little bit for you. The people coming from Virginia and Maryland are not the only Black people coming from the Americas, you know. Lagos was founded by Brazilians. Black Brazilians are the ones who founded Lagos. Just like Monrovia, you know, is these people from Maryland and Virginia. Towns and on the coast in Togo, you know, in Benin, what do they call Benin? Yes, returnees from Brazil, returnees from those places. We all know, or we all should know, Freetown. Right. People in Freetown, those people they came from Nova Scotia in Canada, they came from Jamaica, they came from Britain, London, you know, and boom, they founded Freetown, and they founded Freetown before they founded Monrovia. So that business about founding of Monrovia and then subsequent Liberia colony itself, it's like there's a larger process going on. That's what I'm saying, and we should think about the implications of that. What that says about the time period that these things are happening. Black people who are brought involuntarily on this side of the world, so for the length of the time that they're here, especially under slavery, they won't go back, and we have plenty of evidence about that. You know, they want to go back home. They want to go back home. They want to go back home for a whole variety of reasons. But obviously, too, you know, there's home, and in their own mind, you know, they're thinking about what they could do and those sorts of things. So they try. The thing about in this particular case with the formation of Liberian state, the Blacks the people who came from the Americas and went back, the former slaves who are going to Lagos or going to Cotonou, Ouida, those places, Porto Novo, that's what it was, going to Freetown, none of them are able to create a state, a nation, none of them. The ones who come to Liberia, they create a state. And they create a state because, I would argue, a big part of why they can create that state is because of the new neighbors they have, of the Liberian people who are there, the people who live there.
And that was going to be my question, that
who they form alliances with.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, that's also a group of that is not, again, is part of Liberian history that's unrecognized, you know, and completely, you know, they're just silenced of the history when they are crucial. I mean, without them, it doesn't exist. Even if you went down, if you read all of the accounts of the time that Elijah Johnson and his folks are going on to Providence Island, you know, all the accounts, it is clearly with the help and assistance of people who already lived there. Had those people been hostile to them, they wouldn't have been able to even touch their foot there. You know?
Right. And that's the thing. People left and founded a place in Lagos. You talk of a Freetown somewhere in Togo. I believe the Ashanti Empire because they took Prempeh and the rest of the people in the new land. So they came back. But of all those people that came back, they did not form a separate class. Unlike Liberia, that we have what is called Americo-Liberians or free slaves or pioneers or people that took themselves separate from those they met there.
Yeah. So one of the great contradictions, you see, is that, and I would argue, what to me is like obvious in a way, that those folks who came from those places and went there, they couldn't do that, even though they were part of a kind of elite in those places, and they are, don't get fooled, is that they had white people on top of them. And those were colonies. That's really the difference. Had there not been colonies, those histories would have been different in those societies in many ways. A, B, in the societies that they're going to, again, they have these very hierarchical, authoritarian state structures in the African communities, right? In the African societies, in all of these places. And Liberia is different. Liberia is a unique place in that regard. And that allows Liberia's difference, the fact that we've got these, I would argue, self-governing, more egalitarian political systems in what will become Liberia, allows the development and emergence of this state. Now, the state itself could have gone in different directions, you know, meaning the state that's being created, this embryonic state that's being created in 1847, it could have gone in different directions. Not all of the people who came from the Americas, you know, are thinking this is the only way we're going to go. They debate and argue amongst themselves about where they go. And the people who went out in the end, you know, are the people who form and create this Americo-Liberian oligarchy. Again, I'm asking people to think about history, not reading it backwards, not because an Americo-Liberian oligarchy got established or existed, meant that from day one in 1822, it wasn't established in 1822, the Americo-Liberian oligarchy. In fact, even the Americo-Liberian identity wasn't established in 1822. They didn't leave America as Americo-Liberians, right? They became Americo-Liberians in Liberia. No, and it's a new identity. It's an identity that did not exist before, you know. And it took about a generation for it to get created. And there's nothing inevitable about its creation. That's also what I'm saying. There was nothing inevitable about that creation. There were arguments, there were divisions, you know, boom. And some people lose, some people won out. Come back to my Truic Party again. You know, the Truic Party was the political vehicle of that Americo-Liberian oligarchy, right? And that identity that got created. But that didn't come until the 1880s or so. In terms of its, you know, in terms of consolidating itself. Right. It was trying to find its way at first, you know. It made its first move with Edward James Roy, right? But that didn't kind of work. And then it came back and it moved forward. One of the things that propelled it and that gave it shape was the Berlin Conference in Europe. You know, you can't separate the two things together from each other, meaning these global pressures that are there. Right. So Berlin didn't create the Americo-Liberian identity, but the Berlin process and that whole encroachment, the European formalization of European empire in Africa, certainly, you know, created an opportunity that these folks, seeing themselves, you know, having access to certain amounts of power, pushed and used to now consolidate themselves in power. Again, what I'm arguing here is for us to think back again about that formation and seeing where you know, what changes took place, where did the turns come? Right. The sort of experiment, because a lot of it is experiment. You know, it was there. People are, you know, in the improvising. You know, let's see what's going to happen here. Let's see what we can do. You know, that experiment, it kind of ends up the directions that it could have gone into, it didn't go in those directions. Right. And those directions then change. So I'm seeing all of what are the implications for today? Well, the implications for today, I
was coming to that. So good.
Would be, you know, if Liberians are trying to fashion, you know, national symbols and a kind of history that enables them to sort of see, you know, what that original vision was, what it could be, you know. I think that there's plenty evidence there that it's there for them, you know. And the kernel, the value of what some of those original ideas were, It's still possible. And I would caution people or advise, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
You throw the bathwater out, new water. Rebirth, huh? That's
Yeah.
kind of symbol, kind of wash, new water, but to baptize, new water. Change the water. That's but the idea itself is a powerful idea. This refuge, this place of refuge, and that can go way back into history.
Okay. That's interesting. And even with that, we have not even scratched the surface of Liberian history.
No.
We hope to have you back another time to talk specifically about Liberian history, which we want to do. But for our flag day night tonight, let's conclude with any final thoughts. We really want to appreciate your time here. So please.
Great. I come back to where I sort of started. It's important for us to put things in a historical context. What's really going on. That's key. We really shouldn't read history backwards. I always like to say, we want to start from where the people started and what their options were. Not because some ended up a particular way meant that it was always ordained to go in that direction. That Liberians have to start to rethink what I call the Whig Party interpretation of Liberian history, and try to decolonize the archives and dethrone decenter the ACS. We can't see the ACS as the center of Liberian history. It's the Liberian people themselves. Focus on what the people on the ground were doing then, just like we want to focus on what the people on the ground themselves are doing now to make and to remake Liberia.
That is profound. We want to thank you so much for tonight. We thank you for us taking time off your schedule. God's willing, we want you back.
It was a pleasure. Enjoyed this.
Thank you. And to our viewers across the globe, we want to say thank you also for sticking with us. At this time, we say good night and God bless you.
Good night.